Welcome back to Slack Signal X. Yeah, it's been a while, and before I expose my latest existential crisis, please like, subscribe, and don't be a poser. So we all have this confidence when we're young, before we really mess up our lives. And I miss it. Not because it was wise or earned. Mostly because it was easy. When I was young, I mistook naive certainty for intelligence. I thought being opinionated meant I understood the world. I thought skepticism automatically made me deeper than religious people. I thought there was wisdom in irony. I thought being emotionally detached meant I was seeing reality clearly. But honestly, I just hadn't lived long enough yet. That's what we don't realize when we're young. You can build an entire philosophy before anything important has actually even happened. Before divorce, addiction, grief, before regret, before watching your own personality slowly become something harder and sadder than you ever imagined it could. I used to think atheism felt clean. It was rational and sharp around the edges. It felt like I had escaped superstition and emotional weakness. I looked at religion the same way a lot of cynical people do, as a coping mechanism for people who couldn't handle the randomness of existence. And maybe that's partially true. But some of it was also arrogance. Because when you're young and untested, life still feels theoretical. You can still pretend humans are mainly logical creatures. You can still believe intelligence is enough to guide you through existence. And then life starts happening. And suddenly, your self-constructed view of the world starts leaking from cracks you didn't even know existed. And nobody's ever prepared for the emotional complexity of aging. Not physical aging. That's actually the easy part compared to the rest of it. I mean the slow psychological unraveling that happens when you start becoming aware of your own wreckage. The people you hurt, the years you wasted, habits you normalized, relationships you neglected, apologies you should have made, the way addiction slowly reshapes your personality while convincing you that you're still in control. I spent years thinking freedom meant simply doing whatever I wanted, and that sounds cool when you're 23. At 51, it's way more complicated than that, because eventually you start realizing freedom without any contemplation or reasoning becomes another form of imprisonment. Nobody likes hearing that when they're younger. I know I didn't. When I was in my teens and 20s, I saw older people differently. I thought they had become compromised somehow, weak and defeated, especially people who found religion later in life. I thought they were just afraid of death. Now I think a lot of them are just exhausted from carrying these burdens for decades, and that's different. Life slowly humbles you if you're paying attention, not in a dramatic burning bush moment, but more like water wearing down stone. A failed relationship here, a betrayal there. A night sitting alone realizing you've become somebody your younger self would hate. A conversation with your daughter that quietly breaks your heart because you suddenly understand how much your choices affected other people. That stuff makes you change. Or at least it should. I think younger people believe personality is fixed because they haven't watched themselves slowly transform under pressure yet. They haven't seen how easy it is to become bitter or numb or selfish or addicted or just emotionally unavailable. Because when you're growing up, morality feels very simple because consequences are mostly abstract. And one day you wake up and realize that you and almost every adult you know is carrying this invisible grief. The loud guy at the bar, the woman pretending everything's perfect on Facebook, the guy obsessed with politics, the old punk still acting 25 because he's terrified of stillness. Everybody's carrying something. I know I am. For years, I hid inside identities because they're easier than honesty. I was a skateboarder, a punk. I was the tattoo artist guy, an outsider, a skeptic, an asshole, whatever. Some of those things were real, and some of them were just armor. And that's another thing that happens as you get older. You start realizing how much of your personality was just a survival mechanism. Sarcasm, detachment, cynicism, hyper-independence. It was never wisdom. It was self-protection. Because if you keep enough distance from people, maybe they can't hurt you. Or worse, maybe they can't see who you actually are. I spent years thinking self-awareness meant growth. It really doesn't. You can understand exactly why you're self-destructive and still keep doing it for decades. It's a horrifying truth. I know this. Knowledge alone doesn't save you, and neither does intelligence. I mean, I've met brilliant people who were emotionally catastrophic. That's one of the things about aging honestly. Eventually you lose the fantasy that you're fundamentally different from anyone else. I realize I'm capable of selfishness, cowardice, dishonesty, cruelty, neglect. Not because I'm uniquely evil, but because I'm human. And that realization, it wrecked my youthful worldview. I used to think people were divided into categories. There were smart people and stupid people, good people, bad people, enlightened people, ignorant people. But now, I think most of us are just wounded and trying to survive ourselves. Some do it better than others. Some become softer through suffering, others become hardened. I've been both at different points. And I think that's why spirituality started creeping into my life later on. Not because I suddenly stopped valuing science or reason. It was because reason alone stopped feeling sufficient. I mean, logic can explain grief, but it can't soothe it. And there's a huge difference. When I was young, spirituality, it felt like an intellectual question. Is God real? Is religion irrational? Can consciousness be explained? And now the questions, they're totally different. It's like, how do I forgive myself? How do I stop hurting everyone? How do I become emotionally capable of giving or receiving love? How do I live with regret and guilt? Those aren't hypothetical questions anymore. These are real life questions. And I think a lot of us secretly arrive there around middle age, whether we admit it or not. Especially after failure. Failing changes your relationship with other humans. Once your own life collapses a few times, you stop judging everyone so casually. You start understanding how fragile everybody truly is. I used to think addiction was mostly weakness. Then my life got complicated. I used to think depressed people just needed perspective. Then my life got darker. I used to think relationships failed because one person was clearly wrong. And then I got older and I realized we're all messy and contradictory, terrified and lonely and reactive and mostly desperate to feel love. Aging destroys simplistic thinking if you let it. I think that's why older people sometimes seem quieter, less certain, and some of them a little less preachy. Not because they know less, but because they understand the complexity of everything. Not everything is black and white. I actually don't trust people who seem absolutely certain about everything, especially spiritual people. Real searching usually sounds humble. It sounds more like, I don't know anymore, but I know the way I was living wasn't working. And that's closer to where I ended up. Because eventually I realized my younger worldview had one huge flaw. It left no room for mercy. Not just from a God, but from myself. Modern culture always talks about accountability, but never redemption. We know how to shame people publicly. We know how to expose them, diagnose them, label people, humiliate them. But we really don't know how to forgive anyone, including ourselves. And if you carry enough regret, eventually it becomes unbearable. Especially for males. Men from my generation in particular were trained to suppress things. You kept moving, you worked, you drank, you smoked weed, you joked around, and you buried yourself in hobbies and distractions. Just like our boomer parents did. Anything except sitting quietly with yourself, because silence is dangerous once guilt catches up. That's something I understand now. Your soul keeps receipts. You can outrun yourself physically and emotionally for years, but spiritually not forever. Eventually it creeps up on you in stillness. And for me, it wasn't one dramatic event, more like accumulation. Just years upon years of mistakes, stacking upon mistakes, versions of myself collapsing on top of each other. Underneath it all was this uncomfortable realization that I wasn't nearly as evolved as I thought I was. It was humbling, especially when you spent years building your identity around being more aware or different than mainstream culture. Nothing exposes ego faster than suffering. Suddenly, All my clever philosophies started sounding thin. When I was sitting alone wondering whether the people I love would have been better off with a different version of me. That thought changes people. That's why I started becoming more interested in forgiveness later in life. Not like fake, on the surface forgiveness. I mean like cold truth. The kind of forgiveness that acknowledges damage honestly, without pretending it didn't happen or it didn't matter. Because I don't want absolution from consequences. I understand that actions ripple outward. I understand people get hurt. I understand some things never really heal. But I also don't think permanent self-hatred helps. And honestly, I know it's irrational, but I subconsciously believed for a long time that suffering is how I would repay my debts. Like, if I hate myself hard enough, maybe somehow balance gets restored. But all it's actually done is just spread more pain. I became emotionally unavailable, detached, self-destructive. I've sabotaged intimacy because deep down I no longer believe that I deserve connection. I've done that. And I'm sure a lot of you have. That's why forgiveness feels almost supernatural sometimes. It goes against the logic of shame. But humans, we're more complicated than that. I've met addicts capable of incredible tenderness. I've met religious people filled with doubt. I've met atheists who quietly pray during crisis. Of course, if they think no one's watching. I've met broken people capable of profound love. I mean, we're all contradictions. And maybe maturity is finally accepting that, instead of pretending unattainable purity even exists. I think younger people secretly believe there's a final version of themselves just waiting to arrive someday. Like eventually you become complete and stable and figure it all out. And then you get older and realize being human is mostly just ongoing maintenance. You don't conquer selfishness once. You wrestle it forever. And that's the same with anger, loneliness, ego. There's no final enlightened version. Just a deeper uncertainty and vague feeling of a truth hidden somewhere in the dark. And honestly, it's made me softer. I wouldn't say like weaker, but definitely softer. Like I cry easier now. I definitely feel guilt more deeply, but I also appreciate beauty and simplicity more now too. It's a weird trade-off. Suffering broke me emotionally in ways that younger me would have hated. I used to think emotional numbness was a strength. Now I think it's survival mode. Real strength might actually be staying open-hearted after disappointment. And that's hard. It's way harder than acting cynical. Anybody can become hardened. Anyone can become sarcastic and detached and ironic. But remaining compassionate after life breaks you a few times, it takes a lot of effort. And that might even be spiritual. I still don't fully know what I believe. That's the truth. I mean, some days Buddhism makes sense to me. Some days Christianity makes a few valid points. Some days I think consciousness itself is so bizarre that nobody actually knows a thing. Other days I think prayer is real, and sometimes I think it's just organized whining. But I do know that I no longer believe humans are purely rational creatures. We need forgiveness and connection. We need purpose, community, stillness, love. Without those things, something dies inside us, especially as we get older. Nobody really says it, but I think aging is dangerous if you isolate yourself. It distorts perception. You start living entirely inside your own narrative, your own guilt, your own shame and memories. And nostalgia and memory, it's a slippery slope. You start replaying your failures so often they become your identity. I've done that. But I'm slowly learning there's a difference between remorse and self-erasure. Remorse says, I hurt people and I want to grow. Self-erasure says, I no longer deserve love. And that destroys people. I think a lot of middle-aged people are just walking around carrying that exact feeling and just pretending everything's okay. That's why some of us disappear emotionally as we age. We stop believing redemption is even possible. And I totally understand that impulse. But rationally, I also think it's wrong. Not because I suddenly became religious in some simplistic way, but more because I think human beings need the possibility of transformation in order to survive psychologically. We need to believe we can change. Otherwise, what's the point of even continuing? That's why concepts like grace suddenly change later in life. When I was young, grace just sounded like a corny term. Now it sounds necessary. Because eventually, everybody becomes aware of how flawed we really are. And if there's no room anywhere for mercy, then living just becomes unbearable. And I think that's why older people sometimes pray even when they're unsure who they're talking to. Because prayer isn't always certainty. Sometimes it's exhaustion or grief. Sometimes prayer is finally admitting that I can't carry myself alone anymore. I understand that now, more than I ever expected to. It's one of the strange silver linings of getting older. Your ego weakens just enough for honesty to peek into the room, and you stop trying to look enlightened. You stop pretending you understand everything. And I don't know, maybe that's where wisdom actually starts. Not in having the answers, but in having a little humility. Younger me wanted identity. Now I want true meaning. I used to crave freedom. Now I want connection. Young me wanted to escape pain. Old me wants to stop passing it on. It feels more worthwhile, and honestly, maybe that's what spiritual growth actually is. Not becoming an unattainable level of pure, but simply becoming less harmful, more honest and compassionate, more forgiving, including towards ourselves. If I've actually learned anything getting older, it's this. Most of us thought we had it figured out before life actually happened. Then life really kicked in. It all happened. And as I know now, the real work begins after that. Thanks again. This has been Slack Signal X.